Hi, everyone. In this video, we're going to talk about professional communication in the workplace with a particular emphasis on being a great professional colleague and using your professional communication skills to help you with that. So I want to ground our entire conversation in some principles that have been a really important part of my life as somebody who has spent time working and studying this area. And maybe there's something that you'll consider integrating into your life as well. And those are the principles from improvisation. So many of you have probably seen or heard of improv comedy. Maybe some of you have participated in some improv courses or trainings. And I just want to talk about three of the most important principles of improv and how they really can actually guide our professional communication in a wide range of areas, and particularly in the workplace. So here they are, three principles of improv for professional settings. And the first one is maybe the most popular, and that's this idea of yes and. So what we've been talking about up to this point as we've been working on our professional communication skills is this idea of being authentic, because it's going to lead to being more compelling and ultimately more likable. And so one of the elements that is so critical to have a successful improvisation is to be willing to accept others' ideas. And so the concept of yes and is to literally say yes to the ideas around you and then add or build onto them. Okay. And what this allows workplaces and settings to do is to feel as if your ideas matter, that they're relevant, that your peers and colleagues are actually listening to you. And what it does is it creates a positive atmosphere. So you can be yes and still find ways to integrate your own ideas and your personal opinions without having to actually trump somebody else's. Because in a no but environment, what happens is that ideas get stifled. And not only that, but people typically will get stifled. They'll feel as if they're not being welcomed, tolerated, invited into the opportunity to improve and to innovate. So bringing that yes and mindset with you everywhere you go, literally as you're listening to people, as you're moving through life, taking and accepting their ideas and then adding on to them, building off of what they said. The next piece, a principle of improv that I would encourage you to think about adapting, especially to make your workplace and your collegiality improve overall, is to take this philosophy of improv of making your partner look good. So I have been involved with improvisation now for about the last 20 years or so. Back in college, we were in an improv course, and then we had a group. And I've stayed relatively invested in this area of learning. And so one of the things that always stands out to me from a principle standpoint is that when you're improv and when you're working with your team, your job is to make the people around you look good. And if I can make the people around me look good, they're going to want to work with me more, right? And so this would always be the case when we would be working on, little improv scenes. We'd be getting in our groups and doing activities in that. You began to recognize that there were people that you wanted to work with, and they were the people that made you look good. And so you were drawn to want to be around those people. And I think the ultimate compliment, right, as a professional and for a colleague would be that person that everybody wants to work with, right? Because you make them look good, you make them feel good, you are accepting of their ideas, you're helping to build their ideas. And so this philosophy of making your partner look good is ensuring that you're never communicating with somebody in a way that's going to put them in a precarious situation, right? You're never leaving them hanging. You're never, maybe drawing attention to them when it's not appropriate or going to be helpful for them. Maybe you're setting them up to deliver the punchline. Maybe you're setting them up to deliver the important element of the presentation. And one of the things that can be so, relatively challenging for so many is to give that space and to say, yeah, I want to make the people around me look good, because we're all afraid that we're going to lose our moment, right? Especially from a professional standpoint, especially when, advancing your careers and increasing your salary and your status is really so important. It's critical, right? It's that vocational part of what we do. And yet, one of the things that you have to trust and put great faith into is that when you make the people around you look good, those people are going to want to work with you, and you're going to become desirable. And then it is truly your desirability, like my desire to want to work with you, that likely is going to both intrinsically and then extrinsically increase your overall value to an organization or to a team. And one of the things that I've learned over the years is that people notice these things, right? People will recognize when you go out of your way to make them look good and to make them stand out. And when we go back and we talked a little bit about leadership and the values of communicating leadership, we talked about putting the others around us in front of us. So going through your engagements with this philosophy of saying yes to ideas, building onto them, and then taking as many opportunities as you can to make the folks around you look good, putting them in good situations. So when you're transitioning to them, when you're asking them a question, when you're introducing them, when you're inviting them, those are opportunities where you can allow them to showcase their best attributes and skills, and they will be so grateful for that. And then that pay it forward mentality will come back to you in spades on down the line. And the last principle I would invite for you to consider integrating into your professional communication repertoire is this idea of going forward together. All right. So I've always believed that really, like, no great thing can be done alone. We need one another to be able to advance our ideas. But one of the key critical components when you work in an organization is that there has to be a mentality of pushing in the relative same direction. And so through improv, as we're building a scene, right, as we're going through a scene, we all need to go forward together. So whatever's been put forth, it can't be taken back. So there's this philosophy that once something has been introduced into the scene, once I present something or I build something or I make something or I introduce a character, we can't come along, the next person in the scene can't come along and just delete it. They can't say, no, that didn't happen. Roy's idea didn't exist. It's not there anymore. Pretend like that didn't happen. But it did happen. And so I think one of the things that you could take away from this from a professional communication standpoint is recognizing that once somebody has introduced something, whether you've introduced something, that it's part of the scene, it's part of the structure. And now you have to find a way to move forward with that given piece, with whatever has taken place. And so I want us to use these principles, these foundations, to guide our conversation about being a professional colleague, about the importance of the things that we can do on a day-to-day basis to use professional communication skills to be desirable, to be the person that we want on the team, to be somebody that we look towards when we need to make our partner look good, so that we can bring all of these things as part of our repertoire and start to put them together. Okay, so let's talk about building relationships. And obviously building relationships from a professional standpoint is so important. Building out your network, having great collegial relationships, using those professional communication skills. And so this brings us actually to an interpersonal concept, right? This idea of self-disclosure. So remember, humans are innately programmed to want to reduce uncertainty. Okay, I want to have the least amount of uncertainty with the people that I'm interacting with so that I can communicate with them effectively, so I know what their wants and their needs are. I know what styles they enjoy or they don't like. And I'm using all of that information to encode my message in a way that they can easily understand, appreciate, and maybe do something with. So how do we get there? How do we build that relationship? Well, we go through this process of self-disclosure, right? And self-disclosure is this idea where I'm telling you a little bit about myself. I'm giving you some intimate details to my life in the hopes that you will reciprocate. And so one of the things that you want to analyze and think about from a professional standpoint, especially, is things like the volume and depth and timing of the information, right? So one of the things that we know is that the process will typically unfold in one of two ways. So I'll give you some relative and intimate information about my life. Maybe I'll tell you where I'm from. Maybe I'll tell you whether or not I'm married, or if I have children, if I have pets, right? I'm giving you some information. And then you're going to have an opportunity to reciprocate. So as you're building a relationship, if you're at a networking event, if you're at an interview, if you've just joined a job or you're at an internship, you're going to kind of, in those early days and moments of the relationship, you're going to start to disclose some information. And I want you to pay attention. Is the person that you're interacting with, are they disclosing approximately the same volume and depth of information? And if they are, that is one of the subtle ways that they're probably suggesting, like, I'm okay with advancing this relationship. I'm okay with taking this relationship to the next level. And of course, as you know, in your life, as relationships become more intimate, we know more about the other person. From a professional standpoint, you have an opportunity to be very intentional, very critical, very calculated in what information you disclose and when, timing-wise, you disclose it. So if you come out on the very first day of work and you disclose all of this information to your employees or to your employers or to anybody that you're working with, you may be met with some resistance where people in that relationship may not feel comfortable disclosing that same volume of information, which is going to leave you feeling rather disappointed, because you're going to say, oh, I don't really feel like I have a good relationship. I don't feel like we're on the same relative page. If you've ever gone into a situation where somebody has disclosed a ton of information to you and you didn't feel comfortable disclosing that same relative information back to them, they probably walked away in many cases feeling like, wow, that relationship didn't develop in the way that maybe I had hoped. So what I want you to consider are like the conditions by which a relationship can grow, maybe in the workplace or even in a virtual workplace. And now I want you to be really considerate of how are you going to intentionally self-disclose little bits of information throughout the course of a relationship to keep trying to build it and to bring it together, and also to pay more attention to when others around you in the workplace are giving you bits of information, whether or not you're going to reciprocate with that same degree of information that they've given you. So what are the benefits, or what can happen when we self-disclose and we go through this process of relationship building? Well, the first one on the list here is this idea of creating shared mental models. And this idea that you and I are both seeing a scenario in the same light, right? So I see the problem from a similar standpoint, or I see a dilemma, a challenge, an opportunity from a similar standpoint. And typically what can happen there is you can improve to some degree the decision-making process. So your overall task performance tends to increase because we're on the same page. So as we build a tighter relationship, we can, of course, improve our tasks. The one caveat that I want you to be very sensitive to with this is that when you get a really, really close bond with your peers at work, with a colleague, or maybe a supervisor, the one thing that you want to be careful with is you can sometimes create such shared mental models that you're now seeing problems and opportunities in the exact same way. And that's not entirely ideal because maybe you're missing out on something, right? So of course, groupthink can be a problem here in the sense that nobody's saying things that are critical. Nobody's recognizing maybe gaps in an analysis. So do be careful. And one of the things that you want to work through with those great workplace relationships that you have is recognize, if you have a great relationship, can you still be critical of that other person's ideas? And if not, or you get to a place where you don't think that that's possible, have that conversation with them, right? If you have a great friend in the workplace, you can go up to them and say, I love all of your ideas. I agree with them almost all the time. I feel like one of us should make sure that we're always asking a critical thinking question as we're going through a decision-making process, just so we don't miss anything. And by being proactive with that, you're now hopefully going through the process with your partner, with your friend, with your work colleague, and you're saying to them, hey, look, let's make it okay. Let's set a norm and an expectation for this relationship that we can be critical of one another's ideas, and we're not going to take it personally because we have such a great relationship. And now you're making your ideas a little bit better, and you're also helping to forge and to galvanize the strength of that relationship as well. Finally, revealing thought processes is one of the things that I love about building a great relationship in the workplace, because I love to ask the question of why. So like, why did you do that thing can be such a critical question. So one of the things that I would invite and encourage you to do, especially as you're learning in new roles, when you have the opportunity and somebody has the time, go ahead and ask them, like, so why did you do that, right? And understanding what their thought process was. And if they disclose to you their thought process, it's going to help you understanding the next time they go to make a decision, right? The next time that they have a decision to make, you'll probably be able to forecast how they're going to make that decision. And that may help save you time by maybe taking care of an element of the process, or providing them a piece of information that you know that they're going to want, because that's going to be how they go about solving those problems. So again, having these critical conversations, asking why, those are all great ways to ensure that you're developing really strong relationships. So one of the things too is that as we develop more self-disclosure in the relationship, you can build the relationship really quickly. On the last slide, I asked you a question about like, what are the settings, especially in a virtual environment, where we can build relationships? And so one of the things that you're going to want to do, and this is especially important for those of you as you're kind of entering like your management and those, executive leadership type roles, are you creating a setting that is allowing for non-work self-disclosure? So one of the things that we've seen pretty consistently in the literature since COVID is that we're so work focused, we can be so task oriented. I can hang up this meeting and I can go to the next one immediately afterwards, that those little elements of small talk have been eliminated. Now, from a productivity standpoint, it's probably fantastic because we're not wasting time having meaningless conversations. And in just a moment, we're going to talk about the power of brevity. With that being said, intentional non-work self-disclosure has also been shown to be the glue that holds relationships together. So if you're working for a team, begin to evaluate, right? Are there moments built in where we are building relationships, right? Is a part of our day or a week or a month or a year, whatever it is, are we spending some intentional time building relationships? And if not, you're going to want to be critical of that scenario, because what happens is that if productivity is great and everything's fine, the relationships really probably don't come into question all that much. When it becomes really critical is if things go wrong, expectations, goals not met, or somebody makes a mistake. Now the relationship is at risk. And if you haven't spent any time building and applying glue to that relationship to bring those people together, you're going to have a lot of resentment and frustration. And sometimes that can be really difficult to overcome once it has begun to crack. So spending intentional time disclosing information to one another is a really important part of maintaining those great relationships. So how might you go about doing that? So here's an activity that I love to use in my training and development sessions. It's called That's Three Things. It comes from the improv world. And the idea is that you put people together in partners and pairs, and you give them a set amount of time. And I love to do this in a room. Let's say we had a room of 10 folks. We'd have 5 partners, and we'd get them paired off. We'd give each partner, 60 seconds, and they would talk to one another, and they would have those 60 seconds to try to come up with 3 unique things that they have in common. And then we go around the room, and everybody, the partners would share the 3 things that they come in common, but we would celebrate those that were the most unique, right? So like things that we might have in common. So we could start with some relatively superficial things like where we live or how old we are. But if we want to get a little bit deeper, like, have we ever been in the same place? Have we ever traveled to the same place? Have we ever traveled to the same place at the same time? Do we have a love for a particular television show? Do we have love for a particular television character, for a particular television episode, right? A line from the show is our favorite, right? The more deep and unique that we can make these commonalities, right? We would celebrate that. And the point being here is like, we're advancing self-disclosure. We're really trying to get into the details, because what we know is that the more unique and the more detailed that explicit self-disclosure can be, and the more commonalities we have, the strength and the bond and the relationship is much better. So could be something for you to try with your friends. If you're up for the challenge, find a partner and just see how long you can go. Maybe do it in a room and switch partners. And then at the end, see which set of partners had the most unique things in common. Now, in order to play that game well, as we would debrief it afterwards, you'd have to be a great active listener. And so here are some characteristics of active listening: neutral and non-judgmental, right? Going back to that yes and philosophy that grounded this conversation. Yes, and I'm listening, I'm with you, I'm not judging it, I'm taking on your ideas and I'm making them part of my own, and I'm adding and building on to what you said. Being comfortable, right? Not feeling like you need to fill all of the silent moments, right? Being comfortable with one another sometimes is having great patience to allow folks to have ideas or for ideas to manifest. If you say something powerful and meaningful to somebody and they don't respond, there's a good chance they could be processing it, maybe trying to come up with something just as meaningful and relevant back to you to feel as if they're contributing to the conversation. Of course, head nodding and eye contact and enthusiasm in our voice, in the words and the vernacular that we use should be a common part of our professional communication skills. And then down here, I want to kind of really highlight one of my favorite elements, and that's reflecting back on what is said. So one of the common ways that we can do this is by integrating a pretty simple question into our day-to-day repertoire, and that is, so what I hear you saying, right? And this is a question that I not only use in games and activities when we're doing training and development sessions, but it's actually something now that I integrated directly into my lifestyle. And so I'll find myself out in the world and I'll be having conversations with strangers and best friends. And I will use that phrase quite often in conversation and say to them, so what I hear you saying is this, because I want to have interesting conversations and I want to make sure that I'm learning as much as I can from everybody that I interact with. So by saying, so what I hear you saying, I'm offering back to them what I think they said. I am then inviting them to clarify anything that I've got wrong, right? So if I say, so what I heard you say was this, and they come back and they say, well, actually, no, you missed a part of it. That's fantastic, right? They can correct me, but I've invited that correction. So they're not going to feel bad about correcting my ideas. And I'm going to feel great that they had an opportunity to make sure that my understanding is exactly what it meant to be. I invite you to use that phrase in every type of relationship that you have, especially in the professional world. It will really kind of open yourself up. It shows that you're humble. It shows that you're willing to be vulnerable. It shows that you're willing to be coached and to be improved upon. And I think those are the things that we would ask of all of our colleagues at any level, at any stage of our careers. So let's kind of wrap things up here a little bit by talking about the power of brevity. So this idea of being brief and succinct and clear, and how we go about doing that. So one of the reasons why we might want to push ourselves in this direction is simply because, well, our attention spans are a little bit shorter than they used to be. And there's so many things calling for attention, not just all the social media channels and the various technologies that we have, but literally our work, right? Our work has now been fragmented. And right, you open your email and you've got all these emails from all these different units and business partners. And so you find yourself going, wow, I really need to manage all this. So we need, as humans now, we need brevity. We need to be clear and succinct and effective. And there is a great book by Joe McCormick, and it's on the power of being brief. And he also has a podcast as well. So I invite you, if that's something that's interesting to you, to go and search out Joe McCormick's content, something that I've really enjoyed. And I pulled these ideas directly from Joe's stuff. And Joe suggests that, kind of the principles to be brief require awareness, discipline, and decisiveness, right? So we've been talking extensively about awareness, right? Awareness being this idea that I understand what my audience wants and needs are. I know what they can understand. I know what their abilities are. I have empathy towards the things that they're feeling right now in this moment. And therefore, I can really hone in and I can focus on specifically what it is that they want or need in this given moment. Then it takes discipline. And this is probably without a doubt one of the most challenging parts of becoming more brief. And it is by staying directly on task and giving just the information that's necessary and offering opportunities for follow-up questions to be asked as necessary. And then finally, that decisiveness. Now, decisiveness is really oriented more around the decision-making process. So what I would invite you to do here from a professional communication standpoint is be a little bit more critical of what channels you're using to communicate with your audiences, right? So ask yourself, what would be the most efficient channel to effectively convey the content or message that I need? And if you're not 100% certain that the one that you've selected is right, begin to kind of think about what that audience might need in a given moment. I think that a really effective marketing folks, right, they tend to be really good about their strategic decision-making as to where to place their content and when to place it, right? And who should be the spokesperson in a given moment so that we can relate to the message that's being sent. So decisiveness to me is one of those things that's part of the training. It's part of our experience as we're going through and we're trying things out and we're getting feedback on them, but it's about reflecting on actually what happened. It's the discipline here for many of us, myself included, right, that can be so challenging to make sure that I stay right within the framework. And one of the ways that you can help yourself do this is by outlining more of your ideas, your presentations, your concepts. Even if you're going to have like a really challenging conversation with somebody in your personal life, right, or you're having a professional dilemma, go into that conversation and have 3 or 4 or 5 bullet points written out. So you make sure that you're just staying on those specific topics. It's helped me a lot in a lot of my business interactions. And I think it can help just about anybody for their discipline when it comes to being brief. Finally, less is more. So if you can push towards being more brief, what might take place? Well, I think one of the things is you're going to have more clear communication, and hopefully then you're not going to have as many challenges or mistakes or errors along the way. You're also probably going to get more work done. And I also think that you're going to have more engaged employees or colleagues and partners, right? Because you're being brief with them, you're giving them back their time. They're getting the key core messages. They're saying, great, thanks. Let me get to work on this. And I'm going to come back and I'll get the rest of the information as needed. So this can result in a lot of different kind of positive outcomes when done correctly, but it's going to require that as a group that we're all buying in, because here's the other side of it. There's sometimes there's situations where being brief could be considered rude. And so being brief is not being rude. Being brief is just focusing on the message at hand. You need to set up a culture from an organizational standpoint that celebrates brevity, right? That really appreciates it. So if you're doing a meeting agenda, put time limits on each of the conversations and then have somebody set the time and have a buzzer go off so that it's collective. So we all have buy-in on how much time, for example, we're going to spend on a topic, and making sure that you are allowing for, right, those casual self-disclosure like conversations, but out of respect for people's time, you may want to try and program them after hours, right? And that's why, you see things like happy hour at work, right? Where people will go out on a Thursday once a month or something like that to go and socialize. So if you're in charge of this for your group or organization, try to make sure that your meeting agendas are clear and concise and focused, but then immediately afterwards, maybe program something where there's something social to allow folks to have that self-disclosure, because it really is at the heart of building all of those great relationships. I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope this was fun. There's a lot of great topics and ideas in here that you can take with you to just about any element of your lives. And I wish you lots of luck as you go out and build great relationships.